Hello, I'm Lawrence Lance. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist working in the little town of Issaquah, Washington. That's about 17 miles east of Seattle. The purpose of this video today is to answer common concerns and questions about what hypnosis is, what it isn't, a little bit of the myths, to talk about past life regression, clinical hypnotherapy, the differences between those, life between life, and the cutting-edge technology of quantum consciousness. So let's go back to hypnosis. Many people know the word hypno comes from the Greek to sleep, and it came from what people thought were sleep temples in Greece. They weren't sleep temples, they were meditation temples. People weren't sleeping, they just had their eyes closed, working with their, you can call imagination or visioning things. So again, not sleep. Back to the question, will I be asleep? No. Am I conscious? Absolutely, all the time. Much of what we think we know about hypnotherapy and about hypnosis comes to us from books on fiction, movies, entertainment, drama. The first one I'm aware of is 1845. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a book, and I think the title was The Facts of the Case of M. Valdemar. Well, Poe being the master of horror, it did not turn out well for M. Valdemar. The next one I know was that in 1931, Bela Lugosi, Dracula, and then it just got more and more silly. Eventually ending up in a comedy with Abbott and Costello, and the hypnotherapist or hypnotist is also added again. So great drama, a lot of fun, entertainment, nothing relating to actual practice. So what's the actual practice and what does it feel like? Well, gee, most of us actually know. Hypnosis, or the hypnagogic state, is actually an alpha theta brainwave. And we experience those when we fall asleep or when we wake up. It's this, you can call it distracted, you can also call it highly focused. So it would be a state when, if you're playing an instrument and you're lost in the music, you're no longer really aware of yourself, it's just the music. If you're, well, when we were kids, we were out playing games, and we either didn't hear mom call and pretended we didn't. Same idea. So, common question. People see stage hypnotists and, can you make me quack like a duck? And they're not asking you that they want to. They don't want to at all. They're worried about somebody having power over them. This goes back to that drama thing and Dracula and so on. No, I can't. And the proof of that is that in your most focused state, whether you're playing a piece of music, working at your art table, or, gee, almost anything else you can think of. If the movies, you can always get up and go get popcorn. There's no difference here. Should there be any, let's say that there was an event that caused us to want to leave the building. Well, the answer is, we need to leave. And you're up and we're out. The unit behind me, by the way, is called the Genesis, and we use it for relaxation. It plays music, and it's actually a binaural beat. So the person is able to reach an alpha and theta brainwave state very, very easily. It's excellent for unwinding. Let's go back to past life. This was an accidental discovery, and at the time, as we're talking about 1960s, there was a therapist named Michael Newton. Now, Newton had heard about past life work, and he was very hostile to the concept. He didn't think it was real, and he wanted nothing to do with it. He's got a client who comes to him with unremittent shoulder pain. Nothing's working, and so he decides to use hypnosis, and he tells to the client to go back to the first time he experienced this. Well, the client does. It's 1916. It's the Somme. It's France. It is World War I, and the client has been stabbed in the back by a German soldier. Well, this client's way too young for that, and Newton's trying to figure out what the heck is going on. In the session, Newton, being an amateur historian and curious, he asks the soldier a dozen questions. What's your name? What's your serial number? Who's your unit commander? So on and so forth. Session ends. Not long after, the client's wife insists that the client call him and say, thank you, doctor, I'm so much better, the pain's gone. Newton then decides to write the War Office in England and gets back his queries, and that soldier existed, and it was a 12 for 12. Every one of those questions was right. Newton's trying to think of what the heck is going on here. He's so fascinated, maybe? Something's happened. He doesn't understand it. And so he spends the next 35 years of his life working with past life regression, closes his offices to everything else. At the end of his practice, he writes 2 books. The first book, Journey of Souls. I recommend the book. Second book, Destiny of Souls. Now, why is this important? Well, you might want to read it. Second part that's important is because Newton forms an organization, and he has a couple of startups that don't work out, but eventually he meets a guy who's really good at organization, and he forms something called the Michael Newton Institute. It's a worldwide group. It exists today. It's very, very healthy and very robust. Now, in the 35 years that Newton practiced his past life regression work, he collected over 7,000 case studies. Imagine what could happen when you've got a worldwide group doing the same thing. And they do, and they have close to 80,000 case studies. So Newton's original question, is it real? And the question that clients ask themselves all the time, is it real, has been answered firmly. Let's move a little step further. So Newton begins to start asking himself, what happens between life, meaning what's going on there? What's the soul's greater purpose? And that becomes a major focus in his work, a major focus now of the Michael Newton Institute. So I'll take a little sidestep here and talk just a moment or so about Tonya Swan. Tonya Swan is my office mate, and she does Life Between Life. I don't. I'm not a member of the Institute. She's exceptional. I do the past life work, she does Life Between Life, and I cannot recommend her enough. She is absolutely spectacular. Okay, back in time a little bit more. Another skeptic. The other skeptic is a man named Brian Weiss, W-E-I-S-S, Yale psychiatrist, New Jersey, practicing in Florida, head of psychiatry at the hospital. Has a client. Client is anxiety, so on. He's treated her with traditional psychiatric therapy for 18 months. Nothing's working. So he decides to use hypnosis. She comes back the next week. Nothing's better. This isn't right. So he absent-mindedly, in his book, There's Many Lives, Many Masters, he says, I absent-mindedly said, go back to the first time you experienced this trauma. And she does. It's about 1850 BC. BC. Okay, just keep writing and worry about this later. He's still, and by the way, he is openly hostile toward past life regression, wants nothing to do with it. Says, I'll lose my medical license, I'll lose my position at the hospital. No, go away. Catherine comes back the next week and she's markedly better. And he's trying to figure out, just like Newton did about 10 years earlier, what in the heck is going on? Like Newton, he begins to study and focus on what's happening. Well, the reason we hurt is that we can't find the doorway to unhurt. And Newton and Weiss showed us a doorway. Past life regression, Life Between Life, we see remarkable things. It resolves emotional pain, sometimes physical pain. Weiss's daughter, a young woman, going blind from cataracts at that age shouldn't be happening. Nothing is working. Weiss does, and he talks about this, Weiss does regression on her, and the cataracts disappear. Shouldn't be happening with the medical model that we think we know. But what we think we know is inaccurate. We're seeing changes here on a scale that, and on levels that just defy a whole model of thought. This little sidebar there would take us to near-death experiences. Now, that has tangentially a topic for past life, but I will mention that Eben Alexander was a Harvard neurosurgeon. He's documented this. You can see him on YouTube. And Bruce Grayson, now retired professor emeritus, University of Virginia School of Medicine, has studied NDEs for 50 years. And the whole point here is that consciousness is much bigger than we ever thought it was. This now takes us to the Institute for Quantum Consciousness. A guy named Pete Smith knows Michael Newton. That's how that whole association started. And he's seeing things in his practice that Newton never did. He develops protocols for specific issues. So in past life, we're going back to a past. And like between life, what's your larger soul's purpose? But in quantum consciousness, and you can read about this on my website, we're going to who you really are, who you truly are, not the package that you see here. Quick story on that. I had a client coming in, very nice person. She looks at me and said, oh, I wasn't expecting a man. Well, she'd read Newton's work, and we're visiting. I asked her, well, that'd be a barrier for you. And she's struggling. She's, well, you know. So I decided to use a little humor. And I said, well, you've read Newton's work? Yes. You've read Weiss's work? Yes. And I said, well, it's just a rental. And she breaks up laughing, and we have a lovely session. The bigger purpose here is that when we get past the physicality of who we think we are into who we truly are, we see even more positive change. And just as Weiss said, only love is real. So, on my website, you're also going to see some practice sessions. If you decide to do a past life regression, these are very important. Hypnosis is a little like learning how to ride a bicycle. You're pedaling and balancing and steering all at the same time. And so there's a whole lot going on. A little later, you're probably reading a book and pedaling down the highway. So you do the practice sessions. Get used to the hypnagogic state. Get used to the idea that there's a you sitting in a chair meditating, but there's a you that's somewhere else also. There's so much more. Please feel free to ask questions. I'll answer them as I'm able. I'm Lawrence Lance. Thank you for stopping by.